Hello, good night. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Sharifa Tharpe. I am here live to take your U.S. immigration related questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the comments so that I may answer your U.S.
Hello, good
immigration
night.
related
This
questions.
is U.S. Immigration.
Now, I am here to answer your immigration questions, and I'm also here to give you a great topic. And tonight, I am going to be talking about what to expect in a marriage green card process. So that's where you're getting permanent residence through your spouse. This could either be a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse. Yes, your legal permanent resident, that's a green card holder spouse, can also apply for you. And I just want to give you a little side note. It's a good time for your spouse, your green card holder spouse, to apply for you because there is no wait list for the immigrant visa number right now. And that means that it's going to take about the same timeline as it would if you were married to a US citizen. So go ahead and schedule that consultation to determine whether you should start applying now and what process you should be applying, what process you'll be going through. Because remember that when you're applying through your spouse for permanent residence, there are two types of processes. You could be going through adjustment of status, or you could also go through consular processing. Consular processing is where you are already outside of the United States and you're going to finish the process outside of the United States to come in and become a permanent resident. And then there is also adjustment of status, which could be an option if you're already here. If whether you're going to do adjustment of status or consular processing comes down to who's applying for you, what's your immigration status. So there is a lot, right? And so it's still very important for you to schedule a consultation to determine which way is best for you. Because even one circumstance in your case, one fact can change what process you are going to go through. And if one wrong move could mean a delay or even a denial. So it's very important to schedule a consultation. But in general terms, I'm going to tell you what this process looks like. Let's start with adjustment of status, since that's the process where people want to know how they can finish the process here in the United States. So adjustment of status through your U.S. citizen or even resident spouse is called it's the process of staying here, applying for permanent residence, and it's called adjustment of status. If you are here and you're without status, in that case, your spouse will have to be a U.S. citizen, and you would have to prove that you came into the country with inspection. That means you came in with a visa, but it expired. So if you're here, you are without status, and your spouse is a resident, in that case, you're going to have to wait on your spouse to become a U.S. citizen to do adjustment of status, or you're going to have to go through what's called the I-601A unlawful presence waiver. That's discussing the waiver process is a whole different ball game, and it is definitely going to take another live show for me to talk about that process. But what the waiver process does is if you're unable to stay in the United States and apply for permanent residence, for example, you have a U.S. resident spouse and you're out of status, then what you could do is if you get an approved waiver that's getting forgiveness for the unlawful presence or overstay, it would allow you to then finish your process. So you could wait here, wait for your waiver to be approved, wait for your appointment to be scheduled at the embassy in your home country, and then as soon as it is scheduled, you can take the approved waiver, go to the interview in your country, attend the interview. When you do, as long as unlawful presence is your only immigration violation, they will not hold it against you. All being well, you'd be approved and you'd come right back within a matter of weeks with your immigrant visa to become a permanent resident. So the number one thing that I do for my clients once you come to the consultation is to determine whether your spouse is going to qualify for adjustment of status, that's to stay here in the United States, or consular processing. Once we determine that and they do qualify for adjustment of status, hi there, Christine Sukram, nice to see you. It is at that point that we get started. So I'm going to describe to you what the adjustment of status process is like when it comes on to the marriage-based process. Trini 2190, can I file for my uncle? No, so you would not be able to file for your uncle. So nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, grandparents cannot directly file for their relatives. So let us continue here. Let's see. I don't see any more questions. Let me remind you that I'm here to answer your immigration questions as well. So even though, yes, I'm so sorry, Trini 2190. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have good news for you in regards to the uncle filing. Your uncle would have to have a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse, a parent, if a U.S. citizen or resident parent, but your uncle would have to be unmarried for a resident to file for him. He could have a sibling. So if you have a parent, for example, who's a U.S. citizen and they're of course they'll be 21 and up, then his sibling, his U.S. citizen sibling, may be able to apply for him. But keep in mind that these may take a long time, and so he would want to explore his options. Oh, I'm so sorry, Trini 2190. All right, so what does this adjustment of status process look like when you're applying through your spouse in the United States? So now if you are married to a resident and you're married to a resident and the resident is and you are maintaining legal status, right? So I'm not talking about where you're out of status. If you're out of status and your spouse is a resident, you're going to have to go through another process. And I described that earlier. But if you are maintaining legal status, you have an immigrant visa number available to you, and you've had your I-130 approved, at that point, you could file the adjustment of status application. Now, this is not something that I suggest you do on your own, because the conditions do have to be right, and you want to make sure that you schedule a consultation to make sure everything is going good before you do anything. Because remember, the information I'm giving you tonight is not personal legal advice, it's general information. And so you want to make sure that before you do anything, you get personalized legal advice. The same goes with any spouse of a U.S. citizen. If you are here, the difference between being the spouse of a U.S. citizen and being the spouse of a resident is that if you're here without status and you came into the country, you overstayed your visa though, it's at that point you still may very well qualify for adjustment of status in the United States. And so once we determine that you qualify for this, we're able to apply. So we submit the petition, we submit the adjustment of status application, the affidavit of support, the work permit application, because you are able to get a work permit while during your adjustment of status process. Your travel document, if you want it, the work permit and the travel document are optional, but usually when you're applying for adjustment of status, it is included in the adjustment of status fee in some cases. And then when we submit all of these applications, we do it together. And once it is filed, all the relevant fees are submitted, all the correct fees, all the evidence. Now, I want to stop for a minute to explain to you how important the evidence is. It sets the tone for the rest of your process. If you don't submit sufficient evidence showing your marriage, you could face delays, you could face a request for evidence. for more evidence, and that just leads to delays, or you may even face an outright denial. So it's very important that you get legal representation to help you to put a good, thorough application together. Another pattern that I see is that when couples, so oftentimes where I see things going wrong is where a couple, they file it on their own. And when they file it, they rush, they put some, shabby application together. Sometimes all they do is fill out the application and attach their marriage certificate with no other evidence showing that they have a real marriage. Once they send that in, the officers are usually, once they have reviewed your application and they're preparing for your interview, they usually have made up their mind already that this is a sham marriage, right? Just because they only see a marriage certificate and very scanty evidence, sometimes one or two pictures or some pictures, but it's obvious that you're in the same clothes or that, it's one event. So it's not really saying much about the marriage. At that point, they are already setting to give you a hard time during the interview, right? So it's very important to set the tone for the interview by creating a thorough application that is going to paint a great picture for the officer so that the officer can then see from beginning to end the story of your courtship, how you met, your courtship, your engagement, your marriage, and then they can have faith in the fact that this is a real marriage. So that is tip 1 when you're submitting the application, and this is one of the things that I help my clients to do, is to successfully go through the marriage-based process. Now, once we have submitted all the documentation, you could expect a biometrics appointment. That is the fingerprinting appointment as for the background check. Now, I want to stop for a minute to talk about the background check. Are you worried that something in your background is going to cause a denial? That is a valid concern. So, for example, if you have an arrest, or if you have other issues like other immigration violations like immigration misrepresentation, then you're definitely going to want to talk about that. And I, as representing you as the attorney, I'm able to advise you on whether you qualify and whether there is still a way to move forward despite what happens. Now, remember, not every single arrest, not every single issue in your background is going to necessarily prevent you from successfully completing this process. However, in some cases where you have had an arrest in the past or you've had a past immigration violation that renders you inadmissible, you're going to want to explore whether to apply for a waiver. Now, this waiver process allows you, as long as you qualify for adjustment of status, to go through the waiver process while going through adjustment of status. So my message here and what you should take away here is that having issues in your background is not necessarily going to disqualify you. That's where you should definitely schedule a consultation to confirm that you are still eligible and that there are ways to still fix your issues if you have those, so that once you get to the end of your process, you have an approved waiver, or you've already taken care of those aspects of your background that are affecting your immigration eligibility. So that's the whole point of the background check, though, is to determine whether there's anything in your background that's going to affect your eligibility, that renders you inadmissible or deportable. And at that point, I would have to know that in advance. That's where a consultation comes in. I evaluate all of these issues before and then deal with them even before we file the application. Once you've done your background check, the next thing that you could expect is the work permit. If you have to wait for a long time for your interview to come, then the work permit is going to come before. Right now, we're seeing an average of about 18 months to 24 months That's why they're currently issuing 2-year work permits, because the process is taking about 2 years for this process. So Tanya Cummins, 28, thanks for sharing the live. So Richard, Richardo, let's see. I have a question completely different from the topic you have right now. I'm glad that you've said that, because it doesn't matter what question you have. I'm taking any immigration related questions. So go ahead and put your question in the comments. As long as I'm here, I will continue to answer you any immigration questions you have. So put those questions in the comments. And this is a good time for me to remind all of you that I'm here to take your immigration questions. So put those questions in the comments so that I can answer those questions in between the topic that I'm talking about. The topic that I'm talking about tonight is what to expect in a marriage green card process. So the first thing I'm talking about here is the adjustment of status process. Remember that if you're in the United States, you may qualify to stay here and apply through your spouse. If you're out of status, then you'd have to be the spouse of a US citizen, and that you would have to also show that you entered the country with permission, with inspection. If you're here in the US and your spouse is a resident, then it's going to be what's called the unlawful presence waiver process. But that's not exactly allowing you to stay here for the entire process. And so I've described the process. And so the first is that we apply, very important. Preparation is key to setting the tone for a successful application process. Once we've done that, then the next is your biometrics, the background check. Then it's going to be the work permit if you're waiting for a long time for your interview to be scheduled. We're seeing an average time of 18 to 24 months. And then finally, the interview. All being well, there's no request for evidence. Then the interview would come, and at the interview is where the officer is going to focus on your marriage. The number one priority of the officer is to determine whether this is a real marriage or whether it looks like a sham. And that's why I was talking about preparation is key, because when the officer is preparing for your interview, they have already looked over your evidence and they have already decided whether whether they suspect your marriage is real or not. So it's important that you put your evidence together before. When you're going into the evidence, bring updated evidence, right? So bring your updated evidence showing that the both of you continue to have a bona fide marriage, that you continue to live together, that you continue to commingle your funds, that you continue to have a routine together. The officer is going to ask various questions. Some of those questions will be, how did you meet? When did you meet? Sometimes they will separate you. And sometimes that's a red flag for how the officer feels about your marriage. At the point that they separate you, they're going to ask you questions like, what are the colors of your curtains in your bedroom? They're going to ask you, what is your spouse's date of birth? They're going to ask, what is your spouse's, does your spouse have any medical conditions? What does your spouse do for a living? So they usually focus their questions on the past, so your past relationship. They focus on your routine together. They focus on even the structure of your household. What does that look like? They focus on family. They focus on the wedding. They focus on even sometimes they will go as far as to ask personal questions like, do you plan to have children together, to see if the both of your ideas of future children is going to be the same. So very important that before you go into the interview, you are in tune with each other. You understand You understand each other's value system. You know, you've touched base about what you want together in the future, that you know each other's routines, that you know each other's family members, and so forth. So once you get through the interview, hopefully you get an approval. If you don't, sometimes the officer will say they need more information or they need to review your application in detail. Once again, I see that oftentimes when a good application has not been submitted for the client. And then once everything has been, once there's a decision, then at that point, if it's an approval, then you will get your permanent residence in the mail. If it's not, then it's either going to be a request for evidence or a notice of intent to deny, which may give you an additional opportunity to respond. So it's very, very, very important to make sure that you get the representation you need to go forward in your process. So Pamela, I think I answered your question here. So if it's approved, then and it depends. So Pamela, I'm not sure what process you're going through, but if your adjustment of status has been approved, then it is very much likely that if this is a permanent resident, you will get your permanent resident card in the mail. You can always check with the USCIS to see what to expect next in your particular case. Now, the next is consular processing. That's if your spouse is outside of the United States. If your spouse is outside of the United States, then you're going to be looking at your spouse being here, filing what's called the I-130. It's the same petition that's filed during adjustment of status, except it's not going to be filed with the other types of applications. It's just the I-130 with the evidence of your bona fide marriage. Once that has been done, then it's approved. Right now, we're looking at a little over a year to get that I-130 approved. That's an estimate based on my experience. It could be different. It just depends on different cases. Once it's approved, then it goes to the National Visa Center. The National Visa Center will send an email, and usually they will tell you that they have your approved I-130 and now they're ready to process your application. At the point that they are ready to process it, they will send you an invoice for the affidavit of support. That's where your spouse has to prove that they make sufficient income to support you in the United States. So the affidavit of support fee, as well as the immigrant visa fee, immigrant application fee. That's additional paperwork that has to be done. Once that's submitted and they have accepted all the evidence to their satisfaction, then it moves on to the embassy and is scheduled for an interview. Right now, interviews could take anywhere from 3 months to even a year to be scheduled. So they are taking a while. You're still looking at about an 18-month to 2-year process. So I filled out and submitted the whole process online. So it depends on what process you're talking about. There are a number of different applications that can be submitted by electronically. For example, citizenship can be filed electronically, and I-130 can be filed electronically. And so I would need to understand which process you're talking about to be able to give you an estimate. I-130s are taking over a year. My husband is here on an F1 visa. We're trying to get a spousal visa, but we're told our case is weak. So Amber, Victoria, if you are married to your spouse, and of course this is a real marriage, then in this case, you definitely need help. So Amber, schedule a consultation and we'll talk about it, because I don't understand how someone can just tell you that your case is weak. If you and your spouse, you're married, you have a real marriage, you want to move on with your spouse, then you deserve, the both of you deserve to have this. So go ahead, schedule a consultation, and then we will talk about what is weak about your case. How can you improve upon that? And then move forward from there. So Richard, it's an I-130. So I-130s, it depends. So Richard, if who filed for you? If a spouse filed for you, you're looking at maybe over a year, a little over a year to get an approval. However, if it's going to be a parent, or a sibling, it's going to really depend on where you are, what is your age, what's your marital status, what is the status of your parent. And so who is filing for you? My file for I-485 after K-1 visa on February. I haven't received the date for interview yet. So the I-485s are taking a while. So it is taking about, it could take anywhere from a few months, I would say 9 months on average, to even up to a year to get an interview. So just hang tight, check on your case, make sure they're not requesting any further information, GSN. I filed for my living outside the country. So son, and how old is your son, Richard? So I would need to know your son's age. If your son is 21 and over, then you're looking at and you're a US citizen, you're looking at 6 to 7 years. If your son is under 21 and unmarried, okay, so under 21 and unmarried, you're looking at around 18 to 24 months. It could be less, could be more, but 18 to 24 months is the average time right now. And if you're a US citizen, Richard, then your son's age would be frozen at the time that you applied. So even if it takes more than the 2 years, if at the time you applied and you're a US citizen, he's under 21, then for purposes of immigration, he's going to be considered under 21 when he goes to the interview. So that's good news for you. If you're, so you're a citizen. So yes. So you could be looking at about 18 to 24 months. All right. So at the point that is scheduled for the interview, you would attend the interview and you could expect the same line of questions. It depends on the embassy, especially with COVID now. They may not allow spouses to go into the interview for some embassies. But sometimes it is optional for the spouse to attend the interview if it's going to be at the embassy in the foreign country that your spouse is located in, or where your spouse wants to do the interview. Your spouse is going to have to expect questions about your marriage. How did you meet? They're going to ask about your spouse. They're going to look at the evidence of your marriage and then make a determination. Sometimes it's the same thing. And they also look at your background. It's at that point that you want to make sure that you're prepared for anything that's in your background, to make sure that you can submit a waiver. You're prepared to submit a waiver for any kind of issues like arrest or any issues in your background that could render you inadmissible to the United States. Once the officer is complete with the interview, they'll either tell you you're approved and take your passport to process the immigrant visa. They'll give you a few months to travel to the United States on that visa. And once you land in the US, you become a permanent resident. Now, sometimes they need more information. At that point, you want to make sure you get that information to them ASAP. Now, I want to mention this. Before you get to the interview, you usually have to make sure you do the medical. And so the medical, if it's not done by the interview, is going to delay your application. Is there any ways can undocumented immigrants get a green card or work permit? So there are ways. There are multiple ways, Nadira, but it's going to depend on your circumstances. And that's where scheduling a consultation is going to be very important. I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this. And I've done hours and hours and hours of videos about this. So you can always follow me, check out all my video. Well, there's so many, but you can check out videos. You can start to follow me, and then you'll be able to follow me on Instagram, by the way. I don't do videos here. I just do lives on TikTok. I do lives on YouTube, and I also issue videos on YouTube. I issue videos on Instagram and Facebook. So those are where you can see videos about the different ways that you can obtain status here if you're undocumented. But keep in mind that not every undocumented immigrant is going to qualify for these ways. It just depends on your circumstances, and that's why the consultation is going to be very important. My sister is here with a fiance visa, but her fiance refused to marry her. Is there any way she can apply? So that's going to depend. That your sister should get a legal consultation. There may be ways, but I would have to determine what happened, how did this happen, and then go from there. While the process is going on, can I apply for him to come here on a visa? So Richard, visitor's visa is going to be tough at this point. You're going to have to, your son would have to prove, and it wouldn't be you that would be applying for the visa, it would be your son. There are no visas that you could apply for your son to come here and wait it out. All right, so that is going to be it for me tonight. Thanks so much for joining me on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining me here on TikTok. I'm going to be back tomorrow, though, at around 9 p.m. Eastern Time to continue to take your questions and then bring a good topic to you tonight. If you want, you can join me on Instagram right now. I'm going over there to do another live to talk about this topic, but also to continue to answer questions. So you can join me there, and then we can continue this conversation. I'm the Immigration Attorney on Instagram. I'll also be on Facebook at ST Law Office. That's the name of the law firm. So you can join me on any one of those platforms. And you can follow me there because I release videos on a daily basis on those platforms. Those videos have tips. It has fun stuff, entertaining information, all related to immigration, specifically about how undocumented immigrants, those out of status, can still obtain status in the United States. So I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully I'll see you then. Thanks so much.